Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Product Launch Podcast. As always, my name is Sean Boyce from NxtStep. Today, the guest I have with me is my friend Sreeni from Tech02. Hi, Sreeni. How are you? And thank you for being with us.
Sean, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity. A pleasure to
Absolutely.
podcast with you.
Yeah, for sure. For starters, how about you give both myself and our listeners here a little bit of background on yourself and what Tech02 is?
Yeah, definitely, Sean. Again, my name is Sreeni Jakka. I'm the founder and CEO of Jakka. I've been building software for over 25 years. I've worked at some leading organizations that provided very entrepreneurial kind of freedom to build their technology assets. And I founded Tech02 in 2008. So what Tech02 does is, we have a very unique approach in building software. We serve two different segments. We serve the enterprise segment, where the focus is mostly on the standards and organizational practices, if you will. Very disciplined way of doing things. And we also serve the startup market, where the focus is on lean approaches and rapid development. You know. But I think our specialty lies in how we use our these complementary experiences we have with these other segment. For instance, we try to bring it, while focusing on the standards and organizational practices for the enterprise market, we also bring in our complementary set of, the lean and rapid development to the enterprise market. Whereas working with the startups, we try to bring in the enterprise robustness and scalability aspect of that to the startups, if you will.
Nice. Yeah, that's a healthy blend. I could definitely see how both groups could benefit from the approach, more of kind of what works best in each environment. So that's cool.
Yeah.
I like it. Talk to us a little bit more about kind of the startup companies you work with. Both myself and a number of our listeners are kind of in that early stage or emerging market crowd, building early stage software product businesses. So talk to us a little bit more about the kind of companies that you help in that category and maybe some ideas of the type of projects that you guys work on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very passionate working with startups. In the last 12 years, I would say we worked with over 60 different startups in various stages. We predominantly start working with them in pre-seed and seed kind of early stages, if you will. And we do have clients that get to the maturity level, like Series A funding, and if you're looking at the financial stability and all that, But I think what we do for for the startups varies based on what stage they are in. For most of the pre-seed and seed kind of early stage startups, we work on their ideation, discovery, a lot of technology strategy, prototypes, MVPs, and version ones. Obviously, a lot of technology and business pivots, if you will. So that's what we work on. And as they mature and on the growth cycle, we kind of scale back, for most of those clients, while they're building their own staff and their own teams, if you will. We kind of scale back, and we're working on special projects for them. Providing elasticity. But most of our work, like the real original work, lies with the early stage startups, because they have very few resources, and we try to bring in not just the technology, but business side of thinking, how to build the product, that kind of ideation and the journey, if you will.
Excellent, for sure. And so you mentioned a lot of different type of service offerings: ideation, discovery, working with MVPs. With your experience on the engineering and product side, there's always so many questions about that aspect of building a software product business. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what what advice would you have for those looking to build, an early stage software product company? Where would you start?
Advice. I would say
It's a loaded question, I know.
it's a very loaded question, definitely. But I would say, well, I would say just stick to the basics. Number one, I would say always vet it out. Vet out your idea. Speak. Always speak to people. Listen in. One of the common things, one of the common mistakes I see is startup companies think that they build the product once, they build the software once, and make an incremental revenue on that. That's the expectations they have. And that's not going to work, because the only way you're going to make incremental revenue is you providing incremental value. So that being said, um, I see some startups coming up with a scope for MVP that is so huge. Takes like an year to build an MVP, or they try to scale back and they try to squeeze in that 1 year worth of work in like 2-3 months. Well, obviously that doesn't work. Again, the point is building a product is way different than executing a project. I would say that, if you're a software product company, a startup, you're executing a series of projects, during that journey. You're trying to take your business from point A to point B. And also, the journey, within the journey, you're trying to understand what your customers or clients want. You should always realize that you have the basic idea. It's a very good idea. That's why you embarked on this journey. But your biggest, your biggest task is understanding what exactly the clients need. I think that's where I see a lot of mishaps. They think that they have the whole spec ready, and how do you know that that is the spec? How do you know that that is what your clients want? You got to take your clients through your journey, and learn from that. Oftentimes they understand that too late in the game. So that's my biggest advice: is don't try to come up with a big MVP. You know, it's not people. Your consumers are either it's B2C or B2B. They're not expecting you to build something that they can work with. They want to be part of this. They want to be part of the journey of this, and provide their feedback and value into the system.
That's such great advice. And I see it all the time, is not focusing enough on the customer and their needs, what you said.
Mm-hmm.
The other, I think, big mistake I see oftentimes as well too, is starting with trying to solve everything and be all things to all people, which, like you said, leads to a very complicated first version of your product, which for so many reasons is typically not the right approach. So I'm sure you see this probably even more than I do, because you guys are on the engineering side of things, Techo too. So talk to me about how you start these conversations with people that come to you and they want to build these early stage products and they want it to be all things to all people. Like, how do you help them understand that they need to take a different approach?
Well, that's a very good question. See, I think it varies, depends on how we got into the situation, how we got into the relationship. For instance, we in the 60 different engagements I kind of mentioned earlier, there are different stages and different capacities, if you will. Like we see scenarios where we start with ideation right away, where a founder has an idea and they want to ideate and discover, the whole process of how to get there. And then you see scenarios where people think they have a spec and they want you to build to the spec, and then there are scenarios where you get parachuted in because there is a bad relationship with a technology provider, and you need to go in and fix that. And we also see scenarios where you get your prototype or MVP built by some other team, okay, and it kind of did its purpose, but that's not the direction they want to go with. So we are tasked to work on the version one, or the mainstream app, if you know. But if we had the chance to, or that we had the luxury, and if the founder has the luxury to do it right, from the beginning or at some point, what I would do is, I would just go through an ideation and discovery process. That's the first thing we would do. And one of the things, we try to tell them is, hey, don't approach this as a project. Don't approach this as, it's a totally product mindset, where you just don't build it and expect people to use it forever. You build it, and people, your consumers don't want to get a big complicated product and try to learn, and that's not what they're expecting. They expect, especially from a startup, they do compare that with one of the latest high-tech products out there, but they do understand that it's not a complete product, that's not a bad thing, but they expect to be part of the product building, so it's okay to tell them that, hey, we're trying to do this big thing, but this is what we have, all right, and let them use it and learn from it, you know and one of the things, if we are going through ideation at some point, either in the beginning or some, like during a pivot or something, one of the things I would say is, for a founder, always focus on the problem. Uh, I see several scenarios where the founders are very eloquent about the solution they offer. And you turn it around and you say, what exactly is the problem you're trying to solve, right? And I see them really struggle with that. It's not that they don't understand, but they haven't focused on the problem part. But I would say that if you can eloquently describe your problem, the problem you're trying to solve, I think that provides you such a great foundation, because now you can think about the personas that's going to interact with your product, and you get ideas about positioning, and you get ideas about competition and marketing. I mean, so many things go from there, Without that, if you just focus on the solution first, you're just focusing on the app itself, and the software itself is not going to be your product. Everything together, your marketing, your positioning, and your understanding of the client, of the customers, that all becomes part of the product. So that's where I would start.
So well put. There's so much value in there that I would want to unpack. In particular, starting with the problem, right? That's something that, like you said, I see a lot of it too in the early stage customers that I work with, that they're very excited about what they want to make the product into. They're very excited about all the ideas they have for the product. But like you said, that's not where you want to start, right? You need to start with the problem, and then everything goes from there. Everything else you mentioned, right? Positioning. I also like the fact that you refer multiple times to the customer journey, right? And that they're not expecting it to be a mature product. They want to take that journey with you, though. So as long as you're helping manage expectations for them, then you can set really the engagement up for success a lot better. Absolutely great content. So other questions I have that I get asked a lot too is, right, you don't want to rush into necessarily building the product, right? And you don't want to build a product just around ideas. You want to start with problems, but the question ultimately becomes at some point, when is the right time to build the product? With your experience working with 60 plus startups, I'd love to hear from your perspective, what signs you look for, what amount of progress seems to exist. Like, how do you know what advice to give these early stage companies as far as knowing when they're ready to build the actual product?
Mm-hmm. Well, lot of founders, a lot of startups do market research prior to getting into embarking on the journey. They do carve out some time and some effort, doing the market research. Okay, and then they directly get into building an MVP or whatever, right? So in my opinion, your product, if you're building that software, okay, that itself needs validation as well. So, you know, you're doing the market research and you say that, well, I'm trying not to bring in a real world scenario, so that it doesn't resonate with one of the things we have worked on, trying to be, very hypothetical here. So let's say, they do the market research and say that this is all the features that we want to build in, and there is this bias, being a founder, you put your sweat and, thought process into this. So every single thing you think that, hey, that's part of the MVP, that adds value, but the thing is, you could just, then when are you doing the validation? If your MVP is supposed to be what you think is used for the market validation, and your if your MVP is so big, you know, um, so then you're not doing the validation at the right time, So one of the things I would always advise is your MVP should never take more than 3 to 4 months to build it, no matter how big it is. If it is taking longer than that, I think you got to slice it down. Slice down your features, right? And I think there are customers willing to work with it, and maybe you're doing a freemium model, just to test out. And also a lot of the pilot groups people talk about. I think pilot groups is a very tricky thing. A lot of the times, there is a lot of bias in there. You're asking for your friends and family, to be part of your pilot groups, or taking a small set of your potential customers as your pilot groups, And I would say that don't be afraid to get your first version out. So as far as product build, I think right the moment you're doing your market research, you are building your product. The tangible thing, is something you should get it out in 3 to 4 months, and have people use it, and have the courage to take in the feedback. You know, one thing I always say is people are always giving you the feedback. They're not just telling you the way you want it, but they are always giving you the feedback. It's up to you to figure out what they are really saying about it.
Absolutely. Really well put. Um, for sure. A couple things that you mentioned in there. I love the 3 to 4 months time frame because that gives you a real, that's a guide, right? It's a tangible kind of measure that you can make as far as what you're thinking about building, going and getting a quote for how long that's expected to take. It's a good guide to use to figure out, right, whether or not you're trying to do too much, too little, either way. And you can kind of use that as a basis to figure out where you are and kind of if you're on the right track. Another thing that you mentioned as well too was with the kind of like the focus group approach. If you be careful with the groups that you're getting feedback from. I mentioned this and I write a lot about this as well too. I think it has a tendency to encourage kind of the group think component, where if you're in a group of people, a couple of dominant personalities may skew your results, and you may not get
Absolutely.
all the information that you're looking from everybody who's participating. Of course, in addition to the friends and family effect, where we go and we ask people that really just want to tell us what we want to hear. So,
Right.
yeah, well put as well too. A lot of stuff to look out for, ladies and gentlemen. So,
Absolutely. I just caught something that you said. Feedback is not something what you want to hear. It's something what you should hear, what you needed to hear.
true. Absolutely. Well put. Yeah, you have to be careful to listen for, right, the problems and examples. I think are really helpful, and not just, I think that's a great idea, because that it's very hard to take action from something like that, right? And it doesn't really, it's not that actionable. It's not something that you can really use to take a next step from there or really measure. That's why I like the fact that you've given a great guide that's like, if your MVP is going to take longer than 3 months, you're probably looking at building something that's too complicated.
Right. Right. I
Well
mean,
put.
it's not just it's going to be loaded with features. I mean, see, every startup, well, almost all startups, struggle with capitalization, and the longer you're taking to build it, the more effort and the more money and, expense you're putting into it. And right away, I see another problem that comes with it, where We all talk about how lean and nimble startups should be, and they fail to act quick because of the capitalization problem. So you spend so much in building your MVP or prototype, you know, and now you're out of cash. You can't move fast. You know, and another thing I
Yep.
would say is going back to the focus group thing. I would see a lot of times you don't know where your real customer is. You thought that this group is your customer. I think your product validation should not only give the feedback on the features and the value it's bringing in. I think it should also validate your assumptions on your potential customer. So I would say that I hear some startups saying that we are in stealth mode. I'm like, you shouldn't be in stealth mode. Why are you in stealth mode? If you are afraid that somebody is going to just hear about what you're doing and that they're going to build it by themselves, right? Well, then it's probably not a sustainable idea to begin with.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I take issue with that approach as well too. Is that we're doing something in secret or we have like a closed beta or whatever. I'm like, it is hard enough to get your message out there about what you're doing
Mhm.
to begin with. Don't make that any harder. And don't be afraid to like get your feelings hurt with what you're working on. That's great feedback about your product, good, bad, or otherwise. You need that. Without that data from your customers, you're not going to know where to go, right? You risk ultimately the project failing. So
Yeah.
very well put. Awesome.
Being a startup founder, you already established the fact that you're not afraid to take risk
Right.
and not afraid to fail. So the whole idea of doing this product validation early on is to, if you're going to fail early, right? But at the same time, learn early so that, rather than putting, a ton of money and ton of effort into that, build something that's tangible, that's usable, let people play with it and learn from it and then move on.
Awesome. Very well put. I can't thank you enough for being here, Sreeni. This is outstanding content. I have a few more questions for you before I let you go. The first of which is any resources that you would share with myself and my audience related to this content, books, blogs, any other sites. We would love to hear about those that you may recommend. We'd love to hear about those that you may recommend as well.
Right. Well, absolutely, Sean. And when you speak of resources, there are obviously, internet is so rich, as long as, well, not everything on the internet is true, but, as long as you can look in the right way, I found Medium as one of the sites, that has a lot of good content, vetted content, if you will, and obviously a lot of books, and I read a lot, like lean startups, how stuff is built, how, that how stuff is built talks about how they built Home Depot. Well, it's nothing to do with software, but they did build something, um, things like that. And my biggest advice in terms of resources is to listen, speak to people, listen what they're saying. You know, um, as a startup founder, go on to pitch competitions. You know, get out of that stealth mode. Stigma. Go out and to the pitch competitions. Because again. I think you learn a lot about speaking to people and understanding. I think people are willing to help. They cannot tell you uh, how you need to do everything, and you don't want them to tell you. Because that's your journey. But at the same time, I think there are a lot of nuggets and advice you can get from people, especially when you go to pitch competitions. Another thing I would say, um, speak to investors. Whether you're raising money or not, always never let go of an opportunity to speak to them, because they definitely have some good insight. They for your idea and how to scale up. I mean, you know and again, speak, listen, and process information.
Excellent. Great list of resources for sure. And then last question I have before I let you go is who should reach out to you and how can they get in touch?
Any startup founders, in throughout the journey, I think they can reach out to me. I work with some of the investors and incubator community in the area, especially in the Pennsylvania area, you know, they can reach out to me. My website, techo2.com. O2 is like oxygen. O is in letter O, not the digit O, and two is the digit. You know. Right. So you can email me at Sreeni.Jakka, Sreeni dot Jakka, Jakka at tech02.com. Two is the digit again. Or you can call me 215-262-2633. You know, I'm always up for a conversation with startup founders.
Excellent. Thank you, Sreeni. And I'll include that information in the show notes as well, too, so everybody can see it.
All right. Thanks a lot,
Thank you
Sean.
so much for being here. I really appreciate it. A lot of helpful value for myself and the listeners.
Appreciate the opportunity, and good luck. And I so appreciate what you do for the community. Thank you.
Thank you.